Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I, 15, female, have had a long and elaborate history with injuries, especially breaking my arm. Starting from literally the day I was born, my health has been complicated. I have a few conditions, but none serious enough to impact my daily life as I know it. I have a very weak immune system and somewhat easy to break bones. On top of that, I'm the definition of clumsy, and I'm also a huge idiot who gets herself into dangerous situations for fun. My mom, 40, female, has obviously known me from birth and knows just the extent of my weird bad luck and health issues. I've broken my arms a collective 13 times over my entire life, and almost every time I got injured or sick, it seems somebody had something to say about it. I don't know why, but teachers just love to say that students that get hurt often are attention-seeking fakers, and a lot of relationships with authority figures have been harmful because of this. Every time it's the same. For some reason, a teacher doesn't believe me. They call me a liar in front of everyone. I get bullied for a while, and then I have to try and prove that I am not faking. I could post so many stories about teachers doing this, but this is a story about the time my mom actually managed to get revenge. This all took place around 7th grade. I was 12 at the time, and I had broken my wrist by climbing on top of something I wasn't supposed to, and then falling off like an idiot. My wrist was in Velcro cast since I'm very allergic to the regular cast material, as I figured out through many cases of trial and error. My teacher, let's call her Mrs. Tablet, since this took place while we were learning about Egyptian tablets, she thought history and our personalities clashed a bit. I am more of a creative, adventurous, freethinker type, and she was very conservative. She was by the book and proper. I am more of a creative, adventurous, freethinker type, and she was very conservative, by the book and proper. We hadn't had any real issues before this, but we just didn't mesh well. She was absent one day and we had a sup in. I knew the sup as one of my teacher's friends and one of my bully's mom. I didn't like her, but I was still respectful in class and just tried to get my work done. She got me in trouble for doodling on my paper once or twice, but other than that, everything was fine. Or so I thought. The next day I went into class like usual. We were working on an assignment about Egypt and their tablets when Mrs. Tablet called me over to her desk. I went over thinking she'd just get onto me for drawing on the back of my homework or something, only to get bombarded with a bunch of really weird questions. The interaction went something like this. So Fire, do you know why I've called you up here? I know Fire isn't my Reddit name, but it's my real life nickname, so I'm using it here. No ma'am, I can't say that I do. How long have you had that cast? About a week now. Why? Do you really need that cast? Yes. Well, the substitute told me she saw you take it off. It's a cast. I can't take it off. It would hurt. So if I asked the class, they'd say you need that cast? Yes. If I called your parents right now, they'd say the same thing? Yes. They were the ones to take me to the hospital. And she did this in front of the whole class. I was eventually dismissed and people looked at me weird for the rest of the class. As I later learned, apparently, the substitute had told Mrs. Tablet that I'd taken off my cast as soon as I left class. I didn't, and that I threw it in my locker like, haha, I'm getting away with doing less work. So basically, she pretended I was a bad guy in a crappy high school movie. I don't know why she said this, but it had my teacher convinced that I was a liar and a fake. I technically could remove my cast since it was Velcro, but that would have been extremely painful, and it's not like I could just walk around without it. I wasn't going to make a big deal about it at the time, but it turns out she was serious about calling my parents, but she made the mistake of calling my mom. Now me and my mother don't have a perfect relationship. She has anger issues, so we don't always get along well, but she loves me very much and doesn't let people like this mess with me if she can stop it. According to my mom, Mrs. Tablet called her all cocky and said things like, apparently your daughter is wearing a cast. Did you know that? And also, well, we all know how dramatic teenage girls can be, especially unique kids like her. She apparently even threatened to have me suspended before my mom stopped her and tore her to shreds for talking about her child like that. I don't think I'm allowed to repeat what was said, but by the end, Mrs. Tablet had to retreat with her tail tucked between her legs. She started being even more cold to me after that day and started giving me unfair detentions for not sitting still and doodling on the side of my worksheets. Even then, outside of school, we went to the same art studio sometimes. Weird that someone who hates art so much likes to paint, and poisoned the art director against me and got me put into a lower class. When my mom found out about this, she started the real revenge. My mom has never been a PTA, Parent-Teacher Association mom. She honestly can't stand most of the PTA members, and their kids are chosen as favorites at my school and use this power to bully others, including me and my friends. My mom is, however, friends with a very lovely woman on the county school board, which has more power than the PTA. She told her friend everything that had happened and supplied all the doctor's notes needed to prove that I needed my cast. Her friend managed to convince the rest of the board that Mrs. Tablet was discriminating against an impaired student, given her comments about me being slower at work and just wearing the cast to slack off, along with detentions related to me not sitting still when she knew that I had nervous movements and slight ADHD. At the art studio, my mother pulled me from the classes. I took it upon myself to inform the fellow kids about why, and rumors spread quickly. Soon enough, kids were getting pulled left and right, and my art teacher was pulling at strings to try and get the situation under control. I actually think the studio went into temporary close before reopening again. She was suspended for a week to go under investigation, and it turns out she treated a lot of the unique, as she put it, students in a similar way. She was verbally reprimanded by 2 different departments, and instead of getting her standard raise over the next 3 years, she'll only get half of that. Not only that, but she had to retake a course on how to properly treat students. And if she is ever caught crossing this line again, she'll lose tenure. She'll just be getting her bonus back at the start of the next school year, and I'd just like to say that I hope she learned her lesson. For privacy reasons, I am being vague. This didn't happen to me, but I did witness it. Some background. For the last 5 years, I have worked in a rural office of a large organization in outback Australia. I work 4 hours away from the main building. The organization receives various amounts of government funding for lots of community programs. As such, the organization has a main building, several hubs in the same town, and a few hub offices in different towns. Like my office, not part of this story. The organization has a volume of maintenance and security concerns, which they contract out to security and maintenance company, which I will refer to security company. The contract between the security company and organization is very clear regarding expectations of both companies. Costs outlined and burden of costs relating to oversights. Important for later. The contract is renegotiated every 3 years and is profitable for the security company if it all goes well. The security company was in charge of maintenance and security for the main office, and all offices within 20 kilometers of the main office. I have a few friends across the organization and we meet up for drinks when I'm required to work in the main office, which is about 2 to 3 times a year. During my first visit to the main office in 2018, as usual, I met with a few friends. Aaron, account department, Kevin, contract department, and John, manager of a hub. For the story, I need to explain John manages a hub that is required to be staffed 24/7. 8 workers a shift, 3 shifts a day. Hub is located in a crabby part of town known for violence, drugs, and theft. As such, workers require security present during shift change to make sure workers get to and from the cars without issue. It's company policy as workers have been mugged in the past. Over a few drinks, John told us that the security company appointed a new manager that oversees security for the hubs. I will call him Mr. Jerk. Mr. Jerk was hired after his predecessor retired. Management and security companies receive a bonus each year if their department runs at a profit. Before Mr. Jerk, security ran smoothly and turned a small bonus for the manager, wanting a bigger bonus. Mr. Jerk decided to reduce his department's costs by hiring fewer guards. This affected John's staff as security guards were not always present during shift change. John spoke to Mr. Jerk, who promptly responded with, "If your workers have to wait, then change." John spoke to Mr. Jerk, who promptly responded with, "If your workers have to wait, then so be it. We will get there when we get there. Do I tell you how to manage your staff? No? Then bugger off and let me run mine." John was just venting as he was annoyed at this situation. Kevin broke out the biggest smile and said if you play your cards right, you can really screw Mr. Jerk over. Kevin explained how the security company is expected to reimburse the organization any costs resulting from negligence or oversight on the security company's behalf, something Mr. Jerk is probably not aware of. At this point, Aaron started laughing and said if employees can't leave because it's too unsafe, then they are entitled to get paid until they can leave, including overtime. This overtime will be considered a reimbursement cost according to the contract. You could see the light bulb go off in John's head as an evil smile creeped on his face, and he said, "We will wait for security like Mr. Jerk said." The next part John told me via phone calls over the coming months. John sent Mr. Jerk an email informing him that the lack of security is causing a financial concern for John's department as workers get overtime until security guards arrive. Mr. Jerk replied with, "I'll keep it in mind," confirming receipt of the email. For the next months, John emailed Mr. Jerk daily with shift changes times and told his employees to log when security arrived, as that's when they clock off. Security would always arrive 1 to 3 hours late, one night not even showing. This caused a massive amount of overtime for workers, and due to industrial relations laws, casual workers were roasted on to cover shifts that assigned workers were no longer allowed to work. Minimum 16-hour break between shifts in this field. All in all, payroll in John's department was up by 50K in 1 month. John was called into the CEO's office for this budget blowout along with Aaron, account representative. The CEO says, "John, explain why this month's payroll is over by 50K. Well, because employees had to stay back and wait for security. They can't leave work until security arrives, and since Mr. Jerk arrived, they are always late or not showing up." What? The workers cannot walk themselves to the car? Sir, the site requires security due to the location and risk of assault. And regarding the pay, employees are entitled to be paid if they are unable to leave the site. Well, crap. What can we do about this? We can't keep this up. John asks, is a security company responsible for reimbursement for any costs resulting from negligence or oversight? Aaron says, I believe so. The CEO says, you planned this, didn't you, John? John said nothing as he handed the CEO a folder with every email he sent to Mr. Jerk. In the end, the security company repaid the 50K and Mr. Jerk lost his bonus and more security guards were hired. I was reading about how some people quit their jobs on a spot and the company went under. This is when I was part of a mass walk-off. This happened in the late 90s when I worked for a concrete company. We were the ones pouring foundations, footings, floors, and so on. It was long hours, but the pay was good. Most of the guys on a cruise were awesome people with a great work ethic. We always had some that were slower, but not too slow to impede the job. Well, boss man was micromanaging, interfering, loud. I don't think I ever heard him when he wasn't yelling, and didn't think anything about grabbing a worker to yell in his face. 1 week before the walkout, we were working on a foundation for a kiln at a sawmill. There weren't enough people in all the crews to do the job, so he hired some locals to work until their job was finished and paid the same as us. We didn't care. More hands, more work done, and them getting paid the same as us. We considered they were lucky. No hard feelings, and seemed to get along with all the new guys. One of the new guys was not shown how to do a certain task and thought, who better to show me than boss man? So he walked over and asked to be shown. That is when all hell broke loose. Not sure if the boss man was already in a bad mood or if this caused it, but within a second of asking, the boss man had the guy by the throat against a wall and slapped him so hard he fell over the safety fence and had a 4-foot fall to the concrete floor. Bossman just walked off the job site and drove away. This was a time when cell phones weren't very common and none of us had one, but the two-way radio in a truck had an emergency channel. The foreman radioed for an ambulance and police. The foreman went in the ambulance with a worker and filled out his police report at the hospital. Lucky for the worker, he ended up with just bruising and nothing broken. Since the foreman was a second in charge, he had all of our home numbers and gave each of us a personal call to let us know the hospital report and to ask us to get together for a group chat. All of us showed up, except one, the guy who got hurt. We passed it off. He was too sore and thought no more about it. Not only because it was at a bump and the first round was free, but to find out what everyone's thoughts were. Other than the new guys, we were all happy enough to just walk away like the boss man did and let him suffer the consequences of breach of contract with a sawmill. They just wanted the money. This is when our except one limbed in. He told us he just came from home after talking to the officer in charge of the case and said the boss man just got arrested for assault, causing bodily harm, or something of that sort. I can't remember right off. That settled it with the locals. They were all charging him with breach of contract since he hired them to complete his job. They were all charging him with breach of contract since he hired them to complete this job, and now they can't. The next day, we were all at the job site, and when the boss man showed up, we each walked up to him and said directly in his face, "I quit." Then went to our vehicles and drove away in parade fashion. He ended up with such big fine through his company for breach of contract at the sawmill that took up everything he had saved, and he had to sell off equipment to make ends meet. Then came the 6 or so temporary employees with their claims. The court sided with all of them and he was made to pay out each contract in full. It broke him and he had to let the bank take almost everything. I don't know why, but his wife stuck with him even though she admits he got his just deserved. She comes from a family of money, so even if he's broke, she's not. Even more fallout. Remember that guy he threw over the fence? Yeah, he won his case too, and the boss man had to spend close to 5 months in county jail, a huge fine he couldn't pay, 1-year anger management courses, and volunteer at the local food bank. If there was more, I can't think of it right now. In the end, his in-laws loaned him the money, start up again, and for the last 10 years has been doing good for himself and is actually a great man to work for. I like to think that his entire workforce walking out one by one had something to do with it. I was sitting in my wheelchair outside the grocery store, waiting for my ride to come pick me up. It was a hot day and I was feeling a little restless, so I decided to pass the time by watching the comings and goings in the parking lot. And that's when I saw her, a woman in a designer suit and sunglasses, pulling her car into the handicapped spot right in front of the store. She didn't look disabled to me, but I couldn't be sure. I decided to investigate. I wheeled myself over to her car and said, "Excuse me, but you can't park there. That spot is reserved for people who are disabled." She looked down at me with a mixture of disgust and superiority. "I'll only be a minute. I'm sure you can wait," she said dismissively. I couldn't believe the audacity of this woman. You can't just take advantage of people like that. I said, "It's not fair to those of us who really need those spots." She was getting agitated now and her voice grew louder. "I can park wherever I want. Now get out of my way," she snapped. I knew I was no match for her physically, but I wasn't going to let her bully me. I pulled out my phone and called the store manager to report her actions. As she stormed into the store, I watched her go with a mix of anger and sadness. How could someone be so selfish and uncaring? A few minutes later, I saw her car being towed. She rushed over to the tow truck driver and started screaming at him. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but it was clear as she was furious. Then, to my shock, she reached into her purse and pulled out a gun. She pointed it at the tow truck driver and yelled, "Stop right now or I'll shoot." The driver's eyes widened in fear. He quickly jumped into his tow truck and sped away, leaving the woman standing there with her gun. But as he rushed off, she fired a shot at the vehicle. The sound of the gunshot sent people running and screaming in all directions. I was terrified. I had never been this close to someone with a weapon before. My hands were shaking as I called the police and reported the incident. Within minutes, officers arrived on a scene and arrested the woman for threatening the tow truck driver with a weapon. They instructed her to put down her gun and lay on the ground, holding their own weapons against her as a precaution. The entire police department was on a scene, making sure the situation was under control. The woman was given a heavy penalty for her crimes. She was charged with assault with a deadly weapon, threatening a public official, and illegal use of a firearm. She was sentenced to 5 years in prison and was ordered to pay a large fine. I never got the woman's way of thinking in that situation, but I'll never forget the entitled and selfish way she treated me and others. I run the parts room at an independently owned auto body and collision repair shop. We will call the owners Mr. and Mrs. Bossman. We do mostly insurance repairs and always have between 20 and 50 vehicles on property in various states of repair, depending on how busy we are. Once the estimate for a specific vehicle is approved, my job is primarily to order all the parts for the repair, track and receive, and organize all the parts for all ongoing repairs as they arrive. Input the invoice and process any returns for wrong/damaged/unnecessary parts and such. Plus IT work, because apparently I'm the only person there who knows you can just Google a problem and somebody has usually already posted the answer on a message board from 6 years ago. I complain a lot, but in actuality I very much like my job and I've become exceedingly good at it over the years. My coworkers are generally pretty great. There is almost no office drama. I don't usually deal with the general public and the owners are mostly solid bosses, a husband and wife team. Mr. Bossman runs the day-to-day shop and he's there on site pretty much every day, while Mrs. Bossman comes in periodically to do the books, which she watches like a hawk. Mr. Bossman is a decent guy so far as bosses go, but Mrs. Bossman is great. She's just one of those high personality types who's all peaches, sunshine, and rainbows 90% of the time, right up until the moment something doesn't go entirely her way, at which point she drops the smile and becomes the stubbornest immovable object you've ever butted heads against. May God help you if you actually anger her. She's not a Karen in the slightest, she is just an elemental force of nature. You can bend like the reed, or break like the twig. So I deal with Mr. Bossman on a daily basis and only deal with Mrs. Bossman a few times a week when she needs something for accounting. My default work ethic used to be set to sack of potatoes, but that doesn't fly with the Bossmans and especially not Mrs. Bossman. I have learned the hard way to be very, very proactive in my duties, which is directly why I am now a gray parts guy. Didn't take long to find out that it's just far easier and safer to be able to redirect the coming storm with knowledge and paper trails than to face the fury head-on with laziness and ignorance. She always says the 3 most important rules to follow in this industry are 1. Cover your A, 2. Cover your A, and 3. Cover your A. To which I'd add a 4th rule: always send an email beginning with "per hour phone call." I'd just like to remind you, always have an email. Saved my A so many times. Becomes relevant later and she freaking loves me because I have become exceedingly excellent at making her job easier through diligent bookkeeping. As you also might imagine, doing all this ordering and invoicing and emailing and such demands heavy use of a computer. And for years I had to make do with one that was never built nor intended for the task. It wasn't even very old, just an underpowered tablet-style budget computer originally only meant for the shop foreman to occasionally check estimates. At any given time, I had to run our estimating software plus 2 to 4 price-matching programs and their accompanying background scanning programs, plus multiple Chrome windows for email and parts vendors and parts finder websites, plus Imagine software to view repair photos or edit diagrams to email back and forth. The budget computer had 2 GB of RAM and a dual-core 1.3 GHz processor. It could barely handle running Notepad if you had the main estimating software running, and it made my job painfully slow, even at the best times. For 4 years, I'd mention it to Mrs. Bossman, and it was always, "Alright, I keep meaning to look into that," and then nothing. But that was better than bringing it up with Mr. Bossman. Mr. Bossman was a former repair technician before they opened their own shop together. So anything on the office end is already good enough until it breaks and not worth wasting more money on in his eyes. All the upgrades should be on the production side of the shop since that's what he knows well. She's much more practical about office upgrades, thankfully. Anytime I've mentioned how slow my computer was and how much it was slowing down my work, he'd just laugh it off and say, "It does a job, doesn't it?" and walk away far too pleased with himself. Mrs. Bossman had been going back and forth with a specific vendor that was arguing against some outstanding credits and unpaid invoices that didn't match our numbers, which means they don't match my numbers. So she came into my office to ask me to look into them as normal. But today is not normal. It's especially busy, and I'm already a day behind where I should be. Cue malicious compliance. This time I decided that unlike normal, my workload was light enough. That I totally had the time right then and there and could look them up for her right on the spot instead of bringing her the files later that day. This seemed urgent after all. So I began searching our database for the problem invoices and very deliberately and thoroughly went through every program I possibly could, opening every estimate and reconciliation and digital footprint to pull up any scrap of even slightly relevant information for her, so that she had all the relevant info to argue with a vendor. Each new screen freezing and pausing and loading anew. Each new refresh taking more of those long-form, time-dilated seconds to complete. Those seconds that drag on and on and on like waiting for a traffic light to turn. I was just being properly diligent. You must understand. Oh, here it is. I'd say in my most matter-of-fact, perfectly normal, everything is fine and standard and typical voice. Yeah, that part was returned back on. Oh, let me pull out the credit memo. Oh, actually, that just shows when I generated the return, but not when the vendor actually took it back. Actually, I remember this one now. The driver didn't leave a return confirmation slip, so I think I sent the vendor a reminder email about that. Let me pull that up. Yes, I told him about the issue 2 months ago. And oh, this is a follow-up email that was part of another chain. Let me forward you both of those. And actually, I think I can still pull up the estimate here since it has a full reconciliation. Oh, I hope it didn't freeze completely. Just wait a sec and it usually catches back up. She kept her smile up, but I could tell it had shifted and she was getting annoyed. Does it always take you this long to look up the invoices? I could tell she was getting really impatient, but she couldn't say anything about it since I was doing exactly what she just asked of me. And she does normally love that I'm this thorough, as long as she's not waiting in real time. Huh? Oh yeah, this is normally like this. I say casually. It's kind of frustrating sometimes, but Mr. Bossman doesn't want to buy another computer since this one does technically do everything I need to do. Perfectly innocent moon eyes. It doesn't slow me down too much, not usually. Blink blink, puppy dog eyes. Blink blink, puppy dog face. I continued doing this for all 5 or so problem invoices and honestly, it was 100% typical thing to look up and really only took maybe 15 minutes total in the end. The only difference was making a big show of it while intentionally making it look like I wasn't making a show of it. But that was enough. Well, I really think we need to look into getting you a new computer. This can be good for production turnaround if it's always been this slow. Huge success. Storm of fury successfully redirected from self the vendor, armed with time-stamped acknowledgements for every rogue charge, and finally knowing the crap I have to sit through each and every time I double-check, with all the invoices and credits properly tagged on our end. The vendor's accounting had to admit the 5th up had been on their end, and we had been billed in error. I'm not always right, but even when I'm wrong, I can usually pull up a time-dated email to make it look like I wasn't wrong. Bend a little, and the hurricane may just pass you by for a less-prepared target. She waited a few weeks to find a good deal, but sure enough, I had a new computer shortly thereafter that is much more capable of running everything I need to run without derping out on me, and it's been an absolute champion. Decided to write this because it's been almost exactly 2 years working on that new machine that's still going strong. And just today, I got an unrequested raise for good performance so I'm feeling overly pleased with myself.